Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tween Club's Teen Live Read Aloud. We are going to be talking about fantasy books this week, and it's one of my favorite genres. Fantasy is a genre of fiction that is set in a fictional or made-up world, and is often inspired by real-life folklore and myths. Have you ever wondered why there are so many stories about dragons, fairies, mermaids, and more? Well, magic might not be all fiction. Today's fantasy book I will be reading from is Inkheart by Cornelia Funke, published by Scholastic Incorporated. This is a book about a book in which these two stories, one real life and one pure fantasy, collide and cause a strange unraveling of reality as we know it. Mo is a silver tongue, someone not only known for being great with words, but someone who can read something into reality. And this causes a lot of problems for his family that come back to confront him later when he realizes that he never actually fixed what he read into life. This is a book for those who love stories and perhaps think that they'd want to live in one, but has maybe never considered the repercussions. So, this is Inkheart, and as you can tell, it's a very loved book. Chapter 1, A Stranger in the Night. The moon shone in the rocking horse's eye and in the mouse's eye too, when Tolly fetched it out from under his pillow to see. The clock went tick-tock, and in the stillness he thought he heard little bare feet running across the floor, then laughter and whispering, and a sound like the pages of a big book being turned over. L.M. Boston, The Children of Green Now. Rain fell that night. A fine whispering rain. Many years later, Maggie had only to close her eyes and she could still hear it, like tiny fingers tapping on the window pane. A dog barked somewhere in the darkness, and however often she tossed and turned, Maggie couldn't get to sleep. The book she had been reading was under her pillow, pressing its cover against her ear, as if to lure her back into its printed pages. I'm sure it must be very comfortable sleeping with a hard rectangular thing like that under your head, her father had teased her the first time he found a book under her pillow. Go on, admit it. The book whispers its story to you at night. Sometimes, yes, Maggie had said, but it only works for children, which made Mo tweak her nose. Mo. Maggie had never called her father anything else. That night, when so much began and so many things changed forever, Maggie had one of her favorite books under her pillow. And since the rain wouldn't let her sleep, she sat up, rubbed the drowsiness from her eyes, and took it out. Its pages rustled promisingly when she opened it. Maggie thought this first whisper sounded a little different from one book to another, depending on whether or not she had already knew the story it was going to tell her. But she needed light. She had a box of matches hidden in the drawer of her bedside table. Mo had forbidden her to light candles at night. He didn't like fire. Fire devours books, he always said. But she was 12 years old. She surely could be trusted to keep an eye on a couple of candle flames. Maggie loved to read by candlelight. She had 5 candlesticks on the windowsill, and she was just holding the lighted match to one of the black wicks when she heard footsteps outside. She blew out the match in alarm. Oh, how well she remembered it, even many years later, and knelt to look out of the window, which was wet with rain. Then she saw him. The rain cast a kind of pallor on the darkness, and the stranger was little more than a shadow, only his face gleamed white as he looked up at Maggie. His hair clung to his wet forehead. The rain was falling on him, but he ignored it. He stood there motionless, arms crossed over his chest, as if that might at least warm him a little. And he kept on staring at the house. I must go and wake Mo, thought Maggie. But she stayed put, her heart thudding, and went on gazing out into the night as if the stranger's stillness had infected her. Suddenly, he turned his head, and Maggie felt as if he were looking straight into her eyes. She shot off the bed so fast that the open book fell to the floor, and she ran barefoot out into the dark corridor. This was the end of May, but it was chilly in the old house. There was still a light on in Mo's room. He often stayed up reading late into the night. Maggie had inherited her love of books from her father. When she took refuge from a bad dream with him, nothing could lull her to sleep better than Mo's calming breathing beside her and the sound of the pages turning. Nothing chased nightmares away faster than the rustle of printed paper. But the figure outside the house was no dream. The book Mo was reading that night was bound in pale blue linen. Later, Maggie remembered that too. What unimportant little details stick in the memory. Mo, there's someone out in the yard. Her father raised his head and looked at her with the usual absent expression he wore when she interrupted his reading. It always took him a few minutes to find his way out of the other world, the labyrinth of printed letters. Someone out in the yard? Are you sure? Yes, he's staring at our house. Mo put his book down. So what were you reading before you went to sleep? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Maggie frowned. Please, Mo, come and look. He didn't believe her, but he went anyway. Maggie tugged him along the corridor so impatiently that he stubbed his toe on a pile of books, which was hardly surprising. Stacks of books were piled high all over the house, not just arranged in neat rows on bookshelves the way other people kept them. Oh no. The books in Mo and Maggie's house were stacked under tables, on chairs, in the corners of the rooms. There were books in the kitchen and books in the lavatory, books on the TV set and in the closet. Small piles of books, tall piles of books, books thick and thin, books old and new. They welcomed Maggie down to breakfast with invitingly open pages. They kept boredom at bay when the weather was bad, and sometimes you fell over them. He's just standing there, whispered Maggie, leading Mo into her room. Has he got a hairy face? If so, he could be a werewolf. Oh, stop it. Maggie looked at him sternly, although his jokes made her feel less scared. Already she hardly believed anymore in the figure standing in the rain, until she knelt down again at the window. There, do you see him? She whispered. Mo looked out through the raindrops running down the pane and said nothing. Didn't you promise burglars would never break into our house because there's nothing here to steal? Whispered Maggie. He's not a burglar, replied Mo. But as he stepped back from the window, his face was so grave that Maggie's heart thudded faster than ever. Go back to bed, Maggie, he said. This visitor has come to see me. He left the room before Maggie could ask what kind of visitor, for goodness sake, turned up in the middle of the night. She followed him anxiously. As she crept down the corridor, she heard her father taking the chain off the front door, and when she reached the hall, she saw him standing in the open doorway. The night came in, dark and damp, and the rushing of the rain sounded loud and threatening. Dustfinger, called Mo into the darkness. Is that you? Dustfinger? What kind of name was that? Maggie couldn't remember ever hearing it before, yet it sounded familiar, like a distant memory that wouldn't take shape properly. At first, all seemed still outside except for the rain falling, murmuring as if the night had found its voice. But then footstep approached the house, and the man emerged from the darkness of the yard, his long coat so wet with rain that it clung to his legs. For a split second, as the stranger stepped into the light spilling out of the house, Maggie thought she saw a small furry head poke over his shoulder, snuffling as it looked out of his backpack and then quickly disappearing back inside it. Dustfinger wiped his wet face with his sleeve and offered Mo his hand. How are you, Silvertongue? He asked. It's been a very long time. Hesitantly, Mo took the outstretched hand. A very long time, he said, looking past his visitor as if he expected to see another figure emerge from the night. Come in, you'll catch your death. Maggie says you've been standing out there for a long time. Maggie? Ah, yes, of course. Dustfinger let Mo lead him into the house. He scrutinized Maggie so thoroughly she felt quite embarrassed and didn't know where to look. In the end, she just stared back. She's grown. You remember her? Of course. Maggie noticed that Mo double-locked the door. How old is she now? Dustfinger smiled at her. It was a strange smile. Maggie couldn't decide whether it was mocking or just awkward. She didn't smile back. 12, said Mo. 12! My word! Dustfinger pushed his dripping hair back from his forehead. It reached almost to his shoulders. Maggie wondered what color it was when it was dry. The stubble around his narrow-lipped mouth was gingery, like the fur of the stray cat Maggie sometimes fed with a saucer of milk outside the door. Ginger hair sprouted on his cheeks, too, sparse as a boy's first beard, but not long enough to hide 3 long, pale scars. They made Dustfinger's face look as if he had been smashed and stuck back together again. 12, he repeated. Of course. She was, let's see. She was 3 then, wasn't she? Mo nodded. Come on, I'll find you some dry clothes. Impatiently, as if he were suddenly in a hurry to hide the man from Maggie, he led his visitor across the hall. "And Maggie," he said over his shoulder, "you go back to sleep." Then, without another word, he closed his workshop door. And that is all I'm going to be reading from Inkheart today. But if you would like to continue reading, it is a very well-written book, and it is available here at the Orangeville Public Library. And it might not look exactly like this. It might look closer to the picture that you see when you click on this video, but it is available here, as well as the second book in the series and the third book in the series. And some of our recommendations today, as I mentioned before, lots of dragons, fairies, mermaids, and more in fantasy. We have many dragon books, including the Tea Dragon Tapestry behind me over here, and the Aragon series right here, and The Last Dragon by Sylvana de Mari. And of course, we can't forget about magic. Any of the Harry Potter series or the new Harry Potter and the Cursed Child book are fantastic fantasy books as well. And remember that you can track this read aloud on your Beanstack as minutes or a book to log and get you closer to winning prizes. So I hope to see you guys next week, and I hope that some of you attend our Tween Club next week on Tuesday at 1:30. And I hope you enjoyed Fantasy Week. See you next time. Bye.